Hey there, equine heroes. Cynthia Bain here, and it's time we address the elephant in the barn. Why do clients tend to look a gift horse in the mouth? Have you ever felt a bit underappreciated, devalued in the eyes of a client? Does your dedicated life's work seem trying or even a little apathetic at times? Do people just not seem to get it? Ever wonder if it's all worth it? Well, you're not alone. Not because almost every equine vet will answer a resounding yes to these questions, but because of what my special guest will reveal. Want to know why people look at gift horses you give them in the mouth? Get people to perceive your value and pay you your true worth? Well, there's one secret you need to know that you don't have to go farther than your own practice to find, because it's been sitting right in front of you, only a secret handshake away. My guest will illustrate how your gained access will turn the odds in your favor. Yes, you're about to find out that you're not dead last, but a dark horse in your own race that's actually already won, and your clients are waiting to hand you the trophy. So mount up and listen in as I bring him to you right after this.
Welcome to the Unstall Your Practice digital radio experience for equine veterinary practices and their teams. I'm Cynthia Bain, practice growth specialist for Business Infusion software, expert in equine practice solutions. I'm literally married to the profession and share the purpose of overcoming obstacles to practice growth and making the equine veterinary profession a profitable, sustainable, and fun experience for you. Join me and my guest as we tackle your toughest challenges head on and learn about better, more effective ways to get the job done and get you on your way to unbridled growth and a winner's circle future. So saddle up, because those future wins start right here, right now.
Welcome back to another episode of Unstall Your Practice. I'm Cynthia Bain, your host. Wow. Did you hear our last episode? It was amazing. If you haven't heard it, you need to go back and listen. It was one of my favorites to date. Scott Picard, CEO of Business Infusions, is just amazing when he speaks about teamwork. And not only does he speak about it, but he's the epitome of teamwork. So I just encourage you to go back and listen. Definitely go back and do that right away. Now, you're probably already intrigued by the whole why clients look a gift horse in the mouth thing, since you're listening to me right now. But what's this really all about? I hear vets in practice talking about being underappreciated, underpaid, and the things that break their stride, not only in business, but in regard to the lack of understanding that they feel they receive from their clients, and the effect that it ultimately has on the animal, and how practitioners can become discouraged. I have a guest coming on the show today who is an expert in changing practices, not with trick pony tactics and changing protocols, but by changing minds. When he and I spoke about this topic, I just knew that I needed to connect him up with you. My guest today is very special to me because of a few things. You've probably heard me mention him as the executive producer of my show, but this would be a drastic understatement of the expertise he brings to the table, or stable, as it were. Creator of Broadcast Wellness, a brand bent on spreading a message of well-being via various channels, including public speaking, blogging, wellness and health screening, and of course, creation, direction, and production of digital audio broadcasts like this show. My guest is not only changing lives, but he is changing minds. His expertise in this very area transcends the rift that can and does divide doctor-client opinion to the detriment of the animal, client, and doctor alike. His story is unique, not in that he experienced health problems of his own in the mid-90s when he was uncertain if he would live to see age 30, but in what he learned that turned it all around. He advocates the fact of raised self-awareness to be the saving grace in his case, and is currently in his fourth decade of advocacy, having directly influenced approaching 100,000 people who have been likewise enlightened to a state of similar epiphany and referred accordingly to those very wellness professionals. He gets practitioners to see that their ultimate prosperity is not via a large investment of capital, but tapping existing resources already available within the practice and reside in one small paradigm shift in the practitioner and a peer into the minds of those they seek to treat. I was lucky enough to sell him on the fact that we in equine veterinary practice not only fit the wellness bill, but that we have our share of challenges too. Instead of discussing overcoming disability, he poses, how do we ignite inherent ability, especially the hidden ability everyone has but doesn't realize? Just like in episode 4, where Scott Picard brought outside experience into the equine veterinary space, the man you're about to meet brings the same likewise. So it goes without saying that I am so excited for you to meet him. All of that lengthy introduction said, please finally welcome to Unstall Your Practice, executive producer of my show and my fast friend, Frank Sardella. Frank, welcome to the show.
Wow, I thought you would never ask. It's great to be here. What a long and flattering introduction. Who is your producer?
Who is my producer? You come into this space not necessarily from the veterinary space, but similar to Scott, who I interviewed on my last show. So I just knew that this was going to be a perfect fit because of what you bring to the table.
Yeah, I think so too. Chiropractic actually is the field that I come from. And I mean, other than the fact that you can go on YouTube, you can find chiropractors who adjust horses. There's a little bit of a relationship there because the basic health premise of getting animals or humans healthy is of the same thing. But I think what interested me the most is when you talked about the barriers that are in that profession. Okay, so chiropractic's had a very interesting background in history. And I think when vets hear a little bit about that history, they'll have a little bit of common reality with it because of what they face in what you told me is the barriers with their clients, meaning they don't just directly treat patients. They have a go-between. They have a barrier to get to that patient. They have a client, and the client very much has a different personality than the patient that they're treating. And I'm sure we're going to get into that, and you're going to grill me all about, a lot of the problems that they face with those clients or not being appreciated or valued or what have you. But chiropractors very much in the early days went through that. As a matter of fact, they were actually conspired against by the American Medical Association. You can look this up. It was an actual thing. There were judgments and rulings, and the AMA was found guilty of trying to annihilate and destroy chiropractic. So they went through a period of all kinds of propaganda about them and what have you. And here, they saved my life. So I see a lot of similarities in those two things where you have this barrier of a client between you and the patient, but maybe an opinion someone picked up from somewhere else. And so there's an undervaluing of what they're doing. There's that similar barrier. So I found this very, very interesting. I have never been in the horse space before, other than having a couple of stepkids and one of them who took riding lessons and stuff like that. So I've been around the animals, but I don't know the animals. But I always had this immense appreciation for them. And I can see why vets actually want to specialize in equine. You technically had to sell me on picking up this show. And it wasn't really a sales pitch because when you just sat me down and you said, hey, look, here's what these guys are up against. And I couldn't believe it. The facts that you were giving me and the stresses and the travails that they go through and how many people just give up and don't want to do it anymore. I was like, well, that's right up my alley because this is what I do with people with their health. And that kind of brings us to today. I mean, I'm an advocate. I go out there and I do lectures. And my lectures aren't selling people on chiropractic care. They're actually raising their self-awareness about what their body is, how it's structured, what its design is, and getting them to better understand it and that they can care for it and control it. And once they learn that level of enlightenment, that self-awareness raise is what brings them into an understanding where you can now have a conversation with them about the profession that you're in. And when I looked at what you said they were suffering from, I'm like, well, why are we not crawling inside the heads of the clients? And that's what I'm a specialist in doing. Okay, when I have someone sitting across from me who I already know not only knows nothing about what I know, but they may have heard some things that are not true about what I know. And they have their own viewpoint and their own life and their own experience. And if I don't crawl inside their head first, before I even start a conversation with them, the thing is over before it began. And I feel like that is a good diagnosis for what you told me the problems are that these equine vets are facing.
Two things that you said really resonate with me. And I want to take just a moment first to say that when I was actually working in a clinic, I had the extreme pleasure of working with an equine practitioner who specialized in chiropractic. So I got to experience and watch him do those procedures.
Wow.
I'd love to pay homage to him because he has since passed away, but Dr. Jim Simpson will always hold a very special place in my heart. Just being able to witness what he did daily was truly phenomenal. The second thing that you said really brings us into today. We've talked about the struggles that equine veterinarians face, and I've shared with you that there is a steady decline in the amount of veterinary students who are pursuing the equine industry. And that's creating stress on the ones that are in the industry as well, because there's just not as many people going into it. But ultimately, some of those stresses, I think, come from, for one, horse ownership is very expensive, but so is the cost of running an equine practice. And I think sometimes there is a disconnect between the clients and the practitioners, not to mention a lot of times a client comes in with preconceived ideas of what their horse may be experiencing, whether they look to Dr. Google, and maybe they don't value what these veterinarians are bringing to the table. And I think it's so important because in the human health industry, doctors tend to specialize in one area, but a veterinarian treats the entire horse. They may treat nutritional deficiencies, lameness, infection, the eyes, the hooves. There's a whole difference in the veterinary profession. These doctors have to specialize in the entire horse. So what would you say to that?
Well, that's a loaded question, but one that I'm glad you asked because it is actually my jam in this area. And why I go out and speak on behalf of doctors, and let's say not just on behalf of, but in lieu of, why I'm a better speaker than the doctor himself is. But the reason I'm glad that you're asking is because, look, I take everything back to basics. And the first basic is you have to look at the difference between yourself and someone else, okay? A lot of the top doctors that I work with who seem to have the best way of communicating to prospective new patients out in public, and they do a tremendously great job. And this is for anybody. It's happened to me. It may have happened to you. And when you're talking to somebody and you do this amazing job on somebody, and you really, really know that you got through to the person, you got them to commit to doing something, some next step. You got them to commit to something. And then later on, when it came down to making good on that commitment, they back out or they don't show. And so this is the don't flatter yourself viewpoint. Doctors take offense to that. And I don't take offense to that because I know what that is. And the point of don't flatter yourself is this, that person, when they walked up to you, for that moment, you were the center of their universe. They were paying attention to you. They forgot about everything else, and they're in this conversation with you. But what they fail to realize is the moment that person does an about face after that conversation is over and walks away, and I mean the very moment, you are off their radar. You were not and are not the center of their universe. Their universe has a ton of things. It's got family problems. It's got economic problems. A lot of them don't have to do with the horse, or in my case, with their own health, right? They've got money problems. They've got pressure at work. They might be losing their job. There's layoffs coming. They are stressed out, or they have family problems. They're going through a divorce, or they're getting married next month, or they're having a baby, or they're having their third child and they could only afford two. They have a whole universe of problems. And you are very much not the center of their universe. And maybe you were able to penetrate for that minute, but you have to understand that. Now, why do I say that? The reason I say that is because what most practitioners picture is when some new person walks up to them, picture a little, the little thought bubbles in the cartoons that you draw the little cloud over the head, right? So what they picture is like, picture my bubble has all this information that's good information that we think, oh, I just tell him this, or I tell her this, and they're going to get it, right? And then they picture a blank bubble above the other person's head. And that's where I say, don't flatter yourself. That bubble is not blank. It's filled with stuff, not just on your subject, all their other stuff, plus what they've heard about your profession, what they've heard about you, what they watched on YouTube. And these are all things that filled that bubble for them already. So you're trying to fill a bubble that's already full of stuff. You need to crawl into that bubble and find out what's in it. And when you can do that, then you understand what you're up against, and no two people are the same. You need to be able to look at not only that stuff there, but you talked about Dr. Google, and that resonates with me because every lecture I do, I talk to people and I usually tell them this. I really think equine vets are going to love this because let's say the topic is on, and I don't know what it would be in a room full of people who have horses, right? But in my world, in the corporate world, it's going to be something about stress, let's say. And I get people to raise their hand. I'm like, how many would agree that right now you could take out your phone and search stress relief techniques, have 6.2 billion results come up within seconds, right? Watch a couple of videos and probably put me out of business. And everybody starts laughing and they all raise their hand, right? Because it's true. Like, why have me here lecturing to you? So what I usually position it as is I'm here to show you something that you're not going to find on Google or anywhere on the web, because I show them how every case, and this is no different with horses, I'm sure. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn on this. That no two horses, structurally, mechanically, yes, the basic blueprint is the same, but the combination of experiences that one horse had over another, even if they're closely related and on the same farm or whatever, they're not going to be identical. Each one is its own different case. And what I suspect these practitioners are is very similar to what chiropractors are. They're experts in assessing the case in front of them. And there are mechanics to that case that the clients know not what of. They don't know any of that. And until they're educated on that, then the doctor is not an expert in their eyes, which is, I think, what started all the trouble here. We had a conversation about the word expert.
You know, veterinarians also have a bubble above their head, and maybe they're still on the last horse or patient that they saw. You know, so both people involved in this interaction have bubbles above their head. How do we bridge the gap and get down to that moment at hand?
We could do a whole other podcast episode just on what's in the practitioner's bubble, because you very much in each situation have to be present with that situation and only that situation. You have to have the ability to clean that bubble and just put that person in that bubble. That is a first out of bridging any gap. And I don't care what's in your bubble already. If it's the last patient you were working on or whatever the situation may be, you have to be able to just be very present, be there with the person, interested in the person. But then there is the finding out about the person. Now, when you go to the doctor, usually when the doctor comes in, there's less listening and there's more telling, right? It's like, what's the problem? You tell them what the problem is. They pull out a script pad, they write the script, they hand it to you. There's not a lot of conversation going on. And if there is, it's them telling you. But you didn't ask me a single question, okay? And if you want a really good example, so I had 18 months of my life where I didn't have the best of diets, but it wasn't so much what I was eating as what I was drinking. And I had this habit of getting a 44-ounce orange soda every single day. So I went for a sort of physical to the doctor. They checked my blood sugar levels and he said, you're in diabetes type 2 or whatever levels. And he was ready to pull out his pad and put me on insulin. And he looked mortified. He was genuinely afraid for me. But according to his training, this is the protocol. And didn't even ask me a single question about it. Just went into the protocol, right? But if he had crawled inside my head and shown some interest by asking me questions, which, by the way, would have made me feel a lot different about this doctor. When you ask questions of somebody, it shows them interest. It's such a basic thing. And this is probably the first answer, or the first part of the answer to your question, is showing interest in somebody by asking them questions. But it's necessary to do that anyway, because you need to see what's in that bubble. If he had questioned me, he would have found out about the 44-ounce soda every day for 18 months. Now, I knew when my blood sugar levels were that high. So I told him, I said, Doc, I totally respect you. Thank you for your concern. But I know exactly what this is, and I know exactly how to change it. And he was mortified when I refused the insulin prescription. I mean, mortified, but I'm not being critical of him. He was genuinely concerned for my health. He's like, I'm going to lose a patient here, you know? I said, I need you to trust me, and I'll let you prescribe the glucose meter. So he prescribed the meter, and I checked my blood sugar every single day. And what I did is I got off the soda. I immediately cut out the sodas, all the carbs from my life. I started making like kale shakes and, you know, like really, really just handling my nutrition the way I knew to do it. And I monitored my blood sugar and graphed it every single day. And it went down, 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 back into normal levels. And it never shot up again that high. But what I'm saying is that doctor didn't take the opportunity to gain an understanding of why my blood sugar levels, and that's just me. How many people are in that situation now? Because doctors are not, and it's not a personality thing, it's just how they're trained, it's how they're wired, it's how they're built, right? And you're built to it, well, I'm the expert, so I'm going to tell you what to do, but your understanding may be different. So when you ask me about connecting the two bubbles, I say that you really need to ask a lot of questions of the person to find out the background of what's going on, even starting with the small talk, okay? Even starting with how's it going? You know, even when she says, I'm sorry I'm a little late today, Doc. I had to drop my son off at soccer practice. Oh, really? Your kids play sports? How many kids do you have again? You know, like really finding out about the patient and getting a good, I call it creating a profile on the person. That's what I do with my first interactions with everybody I meet in a lecture or at a public screening. I'm constantly finding out about them. You know, whatever, I'm getting a background. I'm compiling a profile on the person so I know how to talk to them. Check out what's in that bubble, because those bubbles are not visible like they are in the cartoons. They're invisible. And if they're invisible, you've got to get in there. And I call it crawling inside of the head of the person that you need to influence. So you need to, A, be present, meaning nothing in your bubble, but getting through to this person. And B, the getting through involves you crawling inside and finding out what makes them tick and what they know, because that's going to dictate how you're going to talk to them and get them to an understanding of what you do. And there's where the real value comes in, when the person starts to value you and what you do, because then you can give them a proper enlightenment so they're not in the dark and this guy's just barking orders. But I saw a YouTube video that said this, right?
Right. As I'm sitting here, I have interlaced the fingers of both of my hands kind of as a visual for myself. And I think about the relationship between the equine practitioner and the client. But there's also a third party in this, and that's the horse. And both the practitioner and the client together are joint advocates for the horse. They have to form a partnership together to benefit the horse. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. You have to be in agreement on what the protocol is for the horse, or what the horse's needs actually are. And that's where the two bubbles come in. They may be two drastically different points of view. In fact, I'm not even going to say maybe. They are two drastically different points of view until the person knows what you know. So my conclusion is, look, I call this being on the same page, right? To me, I don't try to sell anything to anybody until I crawl inside their head and figure out what they know about the subject, what they don't know about the subject, and then figure out how to get them to think the way I do on the subject before I even bring up what I want to bring up, which is basically the thing I want them to do, or in this case, the treatment that's best for the horse, right? So they have to, yes, absolutely have that shared, purpose and desire, and come together as sort of a team to work for the animal. And that's what it's all about. And what the vet knows is likely best. But the point is that they have to be on the same page. Yes, you need to connect doctor and patient, but that's easier said than done in most cases if you don't understand that to do that, you have to accomplish the same understanding from the patient about the horse that you have. They have to view their horse in the same way you do. That's the problem that you have to tackle. Trying to attack anything else is only going to lead to despair, in my opinion, because you're just going to be beating your head against a wall trying to do something that's never going to happen. And Google will always win. I'm sorry. Google and TikTok are king right now. And I feel your pain on it. I really do. As far as, if you're a practicing professional, I feel your pain on it. It's frustrating to me in everyday life that this is what we're up against. People see on TikTok and they see on YouTube and they know. And I'm sure you guys have, just like chiropractors have in their profession, people teaching people to do things that vets do that they're not licensed to do, and saying, oh, you can do this yourself. You don't need your vet for that. They're just a big scam. This is just more people filling their heads with whatever, and that leads to discord between doctor and client, which hurts the animal in the end.
I have 3 fur kids, one of them being a Yorkie. And I'm a member of a Facebook group on Yorkies, and it infuriates me, the people who will come to that group and they will post something saying, I went to my veterinarian and they said this, but what do you think? It happens time and time again. And so I'm going to bring up a pointed question here, and it could be a controversial answer. I know veterinarians who have had to release clients, and I'm sure in your area of expertise, you have had to counsel other physicians on this subject. Certainly, there will be times when you don't have the perfect relationship between a client and a practitioner. Maybe it's just not a good fit. So, how would you speak to the fact that sometimes that does happen? Have you ever advised a physician to release a client or suggest that they find another veterinarian that they're more aligned with?
Well, I can't speak to the entire profession of equine veterinarians in terms of like percentages of people or whatever. But I know what I've seen in practice over the years. And yes, it's as cliche as it is to say, the smallest percentage of your patients creates the largest percentage of problems. We all kind of know that inherently now. And yes, there are problem patients. However, those percentages can drastically decline by following the aforementioned thing about getting the client and the doctor on the same page, therefore holding the same viewpoint over the animal so they can both agree on the protocols for the animal. Right? So there's 2 things in the Yorkie person, in the example you just gave on Facebook. Now, if it were myself, I would look into this person. I'd go to their profile or I'd look around the group and see what other comments they're making. And if you see them making trouble, they're automatically that personality. And yes, these are the type of patients that no matter how much money they throw at you are as much as your life's worth to release as patients, because not only do you not need their money, even if you think you do, but their attitude is blocking you from earning money. So there is that scenario, I agree. But I think more often than not, okay, I would say scenario 2 with that Yorkie owner is that the vet did not do what we're talking about here, did not achieve an understanding of that person to where they think the way the vet does. Because if they did, they wouldn't be asking that question. So the cause of that symptom is one of 2 things. A, the doctor didn't get them on the same page. Or B, they're just kind of a troublemaker and not worth having as a patient in the first place. But I think that doctors will find those percentages of that type of personality are drastically smaller than they think when they consider how much even their best clients are not on the same page. Even their most compliant clients, their clients who pay and who follow orders and whatever, even those people tend not to be on the same page. And maybe those are people that are not going to be long-term clients and their horses' long-term patients that may just pursue care elsewhere for lack of understanding and have the same lack of understanding with the new person, So I think that there are a few levels to that, and you have to really be able to just be external to the thing and say, all right, let's just eliminate this. Is this person a troublemaker or not? And I think we all know how to spot a troublemaker, right?
Right.
This is about getting on the same page. Somebody you think is looking a gift horse in the mouth. What are they looking for in the mouth? They're looking for the answers that you didn't give them. And I know that's a hard pill to swallow. And you said my answer may be controversial. And it already was controversial in my head while you were formulating the question.
I knew it was.
Well, I'm sorry. This falls back on the vet. And that vet, by the way, in their defense, may have very well dismissed that person correctly and said they're a troublemaker. But maybe not. It's a 50-50 shot. Maybe that vet didn't get through to that person, and therefore, what are they doing? They're still looking for that answer. I can tell you this, Cynthia, in all my years of doing this, what I found out drives people is not relief or riddance of a problem. If somebody's in pain, the first thing that drives them when they have a mysterious pain, and this can apply to an animal, when their animal has a mysterious symptom, their first instinct is not to get the animal well or out of pain. The very first instinct, if you think about this, is to get an answer. What is it? Right? Because that tells you the severity of the thing. Because when it's unknown, you're like, well, is this the end? Is this, should I get my affairs in order? The first instinct is to want to know an answer. And they will look for that answer until they get it. Now, here's the thing. That's where Google and YouTube are enemies. Because they're doling out answers, whether they're right or wrong. They're doling out an answer. And once a person has an answer, that's it. And I'll tell you what, this is the enemy of any kind of doctor, veterinary, medical doctor, chiropractor. The worst thing you can do is when somebody approaches you in public who's a potential patient and says, Doc, what do you think? I get this thing, blah, blah, blah. What do you think that is? You tell them what you think it is, you will never get them as a patient because you gave them an answer. And that's really what it is that person is still answer hungry. They want to know what they didn't know. All that tells me is I say, okay, that vet, not saying good or bad or otherwise, or they made a bad decision, or it's their responsibility, or the person wasn't a jerk, right? But all I know is that person didn't get this person on the same page. And if they had, the person would never have posted on Facebook.
No, I think that that's very true. And I also would like to point out that the diagnosis is a journey. And I think that it's so important, just as you said, to have the veterinarian and the client on the same page because they're in this journey together for the long haul. And so, again, the client and the veterinarian need to hold hands, if you will, and agree to be in this relationship, which is what this episode ultimately comes down to. They need to agree to be in this relationship together in a cordial way for the horse.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think it's important that we have this conversation early on in this series because it's one of the most fundamental lessons that can be learned, that you, as a doctor, your first and foremost thing to be valued for is not the treatment you deliver. And you mentioned in the bio you read on me, which is absolutely 100% true. When I say a chiropractor saved my life back in the mid-90s, I didn't actually realize until recently that it wasn't the treatment that saved my life. It wasn't even the diagnosis so much that changed my life. Indirectly, it was. Them finding the correct cause, yes, that opened the door to the successful treatment. But what happened was my self-awareness went up and I had a better understanding, not of the methods they were using. They got me to understand the mechanics of my own body. Suddenly I became self-aware. I was like, oh, I have this body here. All they did was present me with the blueprint to the body and said, by the way, look at this blueprint. You probably never looked at it before, but there is one. Here's how it's supposed to work. And by the way, here's a picture of how yours is doing. And so that's what you're in the business of doing. With horses or humans, you're in the business of answers. And your only competition is people who are giving answers that are not fundamental in nature. And all it's doing, people are already crazy on the subject. They're frantic when they go searching for those answers. They're frantically looking for solutions. That Yorkie person frantically looking because they love their dog so much, right? And all these, quote, answers that are available on TikTok and Google and YouTube, they're only worsening the frenzy.
I like the term that you brought up, the blueprint, because I think The veterinarian can provide the blueprint for the horse, but also they can be the creator of the blueprint for the relationship, determining how the client and the veterinarian are going to relate going forward. So blueprint really stuck out to me.
My advice to all practitioners is to take note of the fact of what you know and all you know and all your that it took you how many years to become a veterinarian or a chiropractor or a medical doctor or a surgeon. And you're going to have a client or a patient in your office and you're going to enlighten them in 5 minutes. There's a whole blueprint and evolution and all kinds of stuff that occur anatomically. And this client with the patient of yours doesn't know any of that. So all of that has to be, breached for you to be able to, have some kind of meaningful relationship.
So Frank, what can veterinarians implement right away in their practice based on some of the things that we've discussed here today?
In a word, getting your clients on the same page as you with regard to the patient, to the animal, right? Because you both have a common interest in that animal, them as an owner and you as a practitioner to take care of the well-being of said animal, right? And getting that person onto the same page first involves gaining an understanding of what they understand. Now, because you've spoken to so many clients over the years, you may already have a good feel for some of the junk people have that they're carrying around that they, quote, know already about the subject that you won't be able to argue with, right? So the common ground that you can achieve and the thing that they're not really getting off of Google and TikTok is the anatomy of the animal. And the anatomy of the animal justifies what you're doing, your understanding of the mechanics of how that animal works. I don't mean what's breaking down right now. I mean a working right off the blueprint of nature's blueprint for a horse, right? That structure, that function, your understanding of that is the common ground you need to achieve with that person. Because guess what? If you can get the person to view the horse in the way that you do, from that standpoint, they're automatically going to look to you as the foremost expert on the subject, hanging on your every word in terms of what you're telling them. Because when you tell them what needs to be done, and even how much it costs doesn't even matter at that point because you're the expert and you've said that's the way it is based on something they now know. When you're a doctor and you say, hey, your blood sugar levels are in diabetes type 2, you need to go on insulin, without explaining to me what insulin is, what it does, what blood sugar is, what it should be, what levels are, how the pancreas works, what the anatomy of the body is, why does that get triggered, what certain foods do to you, right? I knew all of this, and fortunately I was able to, but most people don't know the body on that level. And 30 years ago, I didn't know how my own body worked. And once I knew how it worked, my whole life changed. I got off of all the barrage of medications I was on, haven't had a single medication since, and it's all because I gained the understanding that the doctor had. And not only do I swear by it, but I advocate. And I've saved so many patients because of it. And you have to see how people's attitude changes. You have to get out there and experience this for yourself. You have to get a person onto the same page and see the difference in their attitude and how much they value you and look at you as an expert. And I'll close with this point, Cynthia, to your question. I told you the story the other day of why I named my company Screening Experts. A lot of people ask, did you name it Screening Experts because you're a screening expert? I am, but that's not why I named it Screening Experts. And you could ask me, was it because you turned me into a screening expert when you consult me? I do, but that's not why I called it that. It's because by imparting this type of information, and there's hours of training on how we get a person to be able to achieve this, but just knowing it, you could make a change. But when you can get people onto the same page and do the things that I'm talking about here, you become an expert. You become elevated in altitude just a little bit, not conceitedly, not condescendingly, but just a little bit as an expert to where a person just looks up gently and goes, tell me what to do. because now they understand truth, and now they understand the truth from you. And they know you're not Google, you're not YouTube, you're an expert. And that's what screening experts means. And that's what the screening process is. Screening, what do you do in a screening? You ask questions. What's your diet like? What's your habit like? Does this run in your family? Blah, blah, blah. All right, let's take your blood pressure. They're all questions. Even when you take someone's blood pressure, you're asking a question of the body. You're just asking questions. So be a screening expert and achieve that with people, and you will become an expert in their eyes. And when you do, not only do they listen to you, but your value has gone up tremendously. And people stop looking gift horses in the mouth because you've given them exactly what they were looking for in the first place.
I think what you bring to the table is so valuable because veterinarians go to school to be veterinarians, to treat the animal. And it's only in recent years that vet schools have incorporated any type of business curriculum at all. And the ones that do, it's very minute. So veterinarians are experts in treating animals, but they may not be experts in communication. And I felt that that's what you really brought to us here today, communication and the importance of that. And when you were talking about not being conceited, but being considered an expert, what came to mind is posture, how we posture ourselves as professionals. Is there anything that you would like to speak to on that before we close?
Well, I could go to town on that subject. And honestly, Cynthia, I have to compliment you on that because I think you cleverly took an hour's worth of conversation and whittled it down to one word: communication. And I couldn't have chosen a better word. So I think that is a brilliant place to end. And as your producer, I'd like to commend you for that. I think this was the most.
Well, I have the best teacher. I have the best teacher, the best producer, the best director. You really do bring a lot to the table, and I thank you for your time today.
Absolutely.
I'm sure that our audience will listen to this over and over again. I know I will. So thank you, and I hope that. Again, we could talk for hours, so I hope that we can do this again in the future.
Oh, I will insist on it. But thank you, Cynthia, for being so eloquent as to interview me and have patience with my lengthy answers.
I was on the edge of my seat listening to everything that you had to say, so I'm sure our listeners will be as well.
Brilliant. Thank you.
That was some incredible stuff. I have so many takeaways, and I'm sure that you do too. One, obviously, communication is key. I really, really liked what he said about a blueprint. And I think that clients should have blueprints on how to be clients, as well as veterinarians having a blueprint on how to communicate to the client. That was really big. That was a huge point for me. And I'm sure it will be for you as well. The other thing that I think was super impressive was how it led me to think about how we posture ourselves in communication, how we consider the other person. And ultimately, especially in equine veterinary medicine, it's all about the horse. Communication is key. And I think that really needs to be the ultimate takeaway. And as I was saying earlier, it's a relationship as well. It's a relationship that's centered around the horse. And you have to convince the client that you know best over anything that they're going to find online. There's so many different equine professionals. There's trainers and there's specialists in the industry as well. But you, as the primary care doctor for these horses, it's so important that the client trusts you and believes in you so that they don't leave and go seek answers that contradict what you may have said. So in order to do that, I think what Frank was saying ultimately is get inside their head and hear what they have to say, what they know, and specifically what they don't know so that you can educate them. And by doing so, they are going to come to trust you and love you as the professional. There's a theme here in the past several episodes, and that is relationships. But I also would like to say that this transcends veterinary medicine. Relationships are the key to life. They're the key to any industry. And I think that's something that anyone listening to this podcast here today can take away. So focus on relationships and how you can improve your side of a relationship to enhance it. Go to installyourpractice.com. Tell me where to send future episodes, and I will send them to you personally as soon as they drop. That concludes this episode, but certainly not this podcast. So until next time, I'm Cynthia Bain, and on behalf of myself, my producer, my guest, Frank Sardella, and the entire Business Infusions team, I thank you so very much for being here, and I'll see you again for another insightful episode of Unstall Your Practice.
The Unstall Your Practice digital radio podcast is a broadcast wellness production powered by Business Infusion Software. Copyright 2024. All rights reserved. Executive producer, Frank Sardella. For more information, visit businessinfusions.com.
Gee, I didn't know he was that old.
Is that it?
No, I'm still looking for a sheet of paper.
I'm doing to you what you did to Fairfield. He goes, thanks, and that's all you're going to say?